Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the ancient folds of Imperial China. Dusty roads, high wooden gates, and the faint smell of boiled rice drifting across the rooftops. You're barefoot on a packed dirt path. The sky above is a soft watercolor wash of misty blue, and someone nearby is playing a mournful tune on a bamboo flute. No cars, no clocks, no phones, just the low, rhythmic hum of villagers gossiping under straw hats and a horse cart creaking somewhere in the distance. You're in Han, Dynasty, China, around 100 AD, which means your shoes are handmade, your clothes are stitched from stiff hemp, and if you want to write down a single word, well, good luck. You'll need an entire toolkit and probably a backup donkey. But we'll get to that in a minute. Right now, you're here, alive in an empire that stretches across mountains and deserts, pulsing with power from the palaces in Chang'an to the river-laced villages on the Yangtze. The Han Dynasty is in full swing, and for better or worse, you're part of the machinery. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time is it right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the quiet efficiency. Han society is deeply structured. Scholars, farmers, artisans, merchants, all lined up in a neat little pyramid. If you're lucky, you're a scribe. If not, maybe you're hauling bricks for the latest government grain silo. Either way, you wake early, work long, and hope your taxes don't increase again this season. Spoiler, they probably will. And as you walk through the village center, past a merchant with trays of dried fish, and a grandma loudly bartering over salted turnips, you glimpse your first scroll. It's heavy, thick, and made from slats of bamboo tied with silk string. The man holding it is red-faced, sweating, and clearly wishing he'd invented a lighter filing system. See, back then, writing wasn't just a hassle. It was borderline weightlifting. Records were kept on bones, shells, or thick bamboo planks. Each character carefully painted with brush and ink, each sentence a literal burden. Need to carry a novel? You'd better bring a cart. But even under the weight of bureaucracy, the empire thrived. Roads stretched out like long black ribbons, and government messengers galloped from city to city carrying orders, taxes, census data, and perhaps a bit of juicy palace gossip. Somewhere in the capital, someone decides all of this needs to be more efficient. Enter the mulberry tree. You see one as you walk past a mulberry grove, just outside the village. It's not particularly glamorous. Twisted branches, pale green leaves, bark with a kind of stringy defiance. Mostly, people associate them with silkworms. You know, those wriggly little guys spinning luxury right onto your robes. But the trees have another trick. A secret, soft fibered magic hiding just beneath their bark. Back in the village, you hear whispers about an official at court. Some say he's a genius. Others roll their eyes and mutter that he's just bored. His name, Kai Lun. He hasn't entered the picture just yet, but his fingerprints, ink stained, probably, will soon be everywhere. You sit by a shallow pond near the temple, watching paper lanterns bob lazily on the surface, listening to monks chant through incense haze. Somewhere nearby, a scholar sighs, dips his brush again, and continues copying yet another scroll, knowing it could take hours just to copy a paragraph. Your fingers twitch. There has to be a better way, and that's when it begins, your journey through mulberry trees, inventive minds, and the quietly revolutionary world of early papermaking. It won't be flashy, it won't be loud, but it will change everything. Historians still argue whether Han China's greatest contributions came from war, trade, or administration. But ask any modern bookworm or doodler, and they'll tell you paper, hands down. And here, standing in the muddy path of this quiet village, listening to the rustling leaves of 1,000 mulberry trees, you're right at the start of it. Your feet ache. You've been following a minor official through the capital streets all morning, and he's clearly in no rush. Slung over his shoulder is a thick scroll made of bamboo slats, clacking gently as he walks. More weapon than document. Every few steps, he adjusts it with a grunt, muttering something that sounds like, "We need better filing." That's your first brush with the pre-paper problem. Everything you want to write down is a logistical nightmare. Bamboo, while abundant and durable, is heavy, bulky, and not exactly comfy for note-taking. And before bamboo, it gets even weirder. Flashback time, you sit cross-legged in a dim hut lit by oil lamps, and someone hands you a scapula, a large, flat-shouldered blade of an ox. Yes, really, welcome to Oracle Bones. Ancient Chinese diviners carved symbols into bones or turtle shells, then applied heat until the surface cracked. The pattern of the cracks was read like some prehistoric magic 8 ball, revealing the will of the gods, or whether it was a good day to plant millet. Handy for divine prophecy, not so much for grocery lists. Fast forward to your current bamboo and silk reality, and the bureaucracy is drowning in its own paperwork. Government records pile up like awkward furniture. Bamboo strips are bound with silk or hemp string and stored in scrolls that resemble curtain rods more than notebooks. One court report might weigh 5 pounds. Your local tax collector probably has back problems. The quirk? Despite all the hassle, there's a certain elegance to it. You spend an afternoon with a scribe who lets you help tie a bamboo scroll, the smooth feel of polished slats, the gentle rustle as they unroll, the brushstrokes of each character flowing like soft rivers across a vertical surface. It's satisfying, meditative even, but you also need a desk the size of a canoe to open one. And then there's silk. If you're very fancy, or very rich, you might write on thin silk cloth. Lightweight and smooth, yes, but extravagantly expensive. It's like writing your to-do list on a luxury scarf. Government use. Laughable. Even the emperor isn't handing out silk memos to every official. So here you are, in a society with an advanced writing system and a booming administrative machine. But without a convenient medium for everyday writing. Bamboo is too heavy. Silk is too pricey. Bones? Let's not go back to bones. You join a traveling scholar on the road one day. He's lugging 2 massive scrolls and trying not to drop his inkstone into the mud. He tells you about his dream of a lighter, foldable, cheap alternative. Something anyone could use. He sighs, then pauses. Maybe bark. You laugh, but he's serious. And he's not the only one. Historians still argue whether the need for better writing material was driven more by government demand or the spread of literacy. Either way, the pressure is mounting. The empire is growing. The flow of information is a flood. And the infrastructure is, well, made of sticks. At a roadside inn, you watch a minor clerk try to copy an edict onto bamboo while balancing his food tray. He gives up halfway through and just eats. You don't blame him. Then there are the messengers, young men riding on horseback with scrolls bouncing at their hips like decorative logs. Their job is to deliver imperial orders quickly, but their tools are working against them. One particularly animated writer jokes that he nearly fell off his horse trying to untangle a scroll mid-gallop. In the quieter corners of the empire, fishing villages, mountain temples, roadside tea shops, people are starting to murmur about alternatives. Rumors of experiments with bark, hemp rags, fish nets. Nothing official yet, but you can feel it change is coming. And amid this era of clunky convenience, you start to notice the subtle absurdity of it all. A civilization that can build suspension bridges, chart the stars, and construct palaces with thousands of workers still hasn't figured out how to make a decent notepad. One day, while lounging by a lotus pond, you see a kid trying to write a poem using a bamboo slat balanced on his knee. It wobbles. He drops it. It floats away. That's the moment. You don't know it yet, but paper is just around the corner. And the mulberry trees in the hills above the city, they're about to become the unlikeliest heroes of bureaucracy. You find yourself climbing a dirt trail that snakes up through the hills beyond the city. The morning fog is just beginning to lift, leaving behind damp leaves and the smell of wet earth. All around you, mulberry trees stretch their twisted limbs toward the pale sky. They're nothing like the tall, noble pines you might find carved into a scholar's ink painting. No, these are scrappy little survivors, tangled and low to the ground, their bark flaking like old paint. And yet, somehow, these scruffy trees are the backbone of an empire's luxury. You see, the mulberry leaf is the Michelin star dinner for silkworms. Those finicky little gluttons won't touch anything else. So farmers plant mulberries by the hundreds, not for the trees themselves, but for the bugs they feed. And those bugs, they spin silk. Thin, glossy, shimmering threads that could bankrupt a peasant or fund an emperor's wardrobe. You join a local farmer as he works. His hands are calloused, his tunic faded, and he's humming a tune about a weaver girl and a coward. Classic. With a hooked blade, he strips bark from one of the younger mulberry trees and tosses it into a basket like it's kindling. Can't feed bark to worms. He grunts, but the court's been buying a lot lately. He won't say more, just shrugs and goes back to peeling. That's your first hint. You trail after him, watching as the bark piles grow. You touch the stripped wood. It's fibrous and surprisingly soft when damp. The texture reminds you of old linen. For a moment, it seems ridiculous that this stuff might someday replace silk scrolls or bamboo records. But you remember what the scholar said, bark? Maybe he wasn't joking. Later that afternoon, in a nearby village, you eavesdrop on two traders. They're arguing over bark pricing. Mulberry's up again. One mutters, stuffing a pipe. Court's hoarding it. Something about fibers for sheets. The other snorts. Aren't we already making enough clothes? Not clothes. The first replies, lowering his voice. Not anymore. The pieces are starting to fit together. You sit near a riverbank, where women are washing bundles of mulberry bark in wooden tubs. The water runs cloudy with fine shreds. Nearby, a kid pokes at a lump of soaked pulp with a stick. The kid giggles, then flings it like mud at a tree. It sticks, sort of. Quirky fact, some folk healers believe boiled mulberry bark can ease fevers or treat burns. Others use the inner bark as an emergency fiber for thread or rope. But in this quiet corner of the Hainan world, something stranger is happening. People are taking what was once a byproduct and giving it a brand new role. Historians still argue whether mulberry bark was always the first choice for papermaking, or if it simply became the best once other materials failed. Some say bamboo, hemp, and rags were equally vital in those early experiments. But mulberry's properties, long fibers, pliable texture, and sheer availability, seem to give it a decisive edge. At dusk, you walk with a woodcutter heading back to town. He carries an oddly light bundle wrapped in cloth. You ask what's inside. He grins and says, sheets, for writing. You think he means cloth, until he unwraps it and shows you something thin, fibrous, and oddly beautiful. It's not silk. It's not bamboo. It's something new. And then it hits you. The trees you've passed all day, the bark being peeled and boiled and mashed. They're not just background anymore. They're the raw ingredient of a quiet revolution. The kind of revolution that doesn't shout or march, but simply spreads, one soft, pale sheet at a time. You stop beneath a particularly knotted mulberry, press your palm to its bark, and wonder how many ideas, secrets, poems, and policies will someday ride the veins of this tree. The capital is humming. You feel it before you hear it. A kind of busy, pulpy anticipation. Scroll. Carriers rush past in a clatter of sandals and silk belts. Whispered conversations ripple through the market, laced with that familiar mix of awe and suspicion that tends to follow innovation. And at the center of it all, quietly working behind a carved screen at the imperial court, is Kai Lun. You don't meet him right away. First, you hear about him. A palace cook tells you the man once asked for boiled tree bark and leftover hemp scraps at dinner. A tax clerk recalls him borrowing the linen rag used to clean ink pots. A guard swears Kai Lun once smuggled a fishnet into the Ministry of Rights for research, he claims. It sounds bizarre, but somehow it all fits. When you finally catch a glimpse of him, he's seated cross-legged in a garden pavilion, scrolls spread around him like fallen leaves. He's not grand or regal. He looks tired. Inky fingers, hair hastily tied, robes smudged with who knows what. But his eyes, those spark with something sharper than gossip obsession. Kai Lun is a court eunuch, a mid-ranking official tasked with managing materials and supplies. Not the flashiest position in the Han bureaucracy, but it gives him access to everything he needs: bark, rags, fishnets, hemp, water, and the occasional unlucky kitchen basket. The story goes that, around 105 AD, he presents his creation to the emperor, a sheet of paper made from boiled and pulped fibers pressed onto a flat surface and left to dry. Simple, unassuming, revolutionary. You're allowed to watch one of his early experiments. A wooden frame like a window screen is dipped into a slurry of bark pulp and hemp threads. Slowly, it's lifted out, dripping, fragile, shimmering under the sunlight. Then it's laid flat to dry. Hours later, someone peels it up. It's light, flexible, smooth enough to write on. The room goes quiet. This moment, it's the sound of history changing so gently, most people won't realize it for centuries. You lean in as Kai Lun explains the process. He speaks slowly, weighing each word like gold. Bark gives strength. Rags give softness. Water teaches patience. You try not to roll your eyes at that last one, but honestly, he's not wrong. Historians still debate how much of this invention was truly Kai Lun's own. Was he improving on older methods already used by craftsmen in the countryside? Did he take credit for a long-standing folk practice? Maybe. Probably. The truth is mushy, like the pulp he stirs with his long-handled spoon. But what's undeniable is that he made it official. He brought it to court, named it, and standardized it. In the weeks that follow, you help carry buckets of bark, stomp soaked rags underfoot, and stir the slurry until your arms go numb. It's exhausting, messy, and smells faintly of boiled weeds and wet dog. But you begin to understand the rhythm: soak, pound, mix, screen, press, dry. It's like making pancakes if your pancakes could someday carry a royal edict. One morning, Kai Lun hands you a fresh sheet. It's warm from the sun, soft but resilient. You touch it gently. It bends, it crinkles, it sings beneath your fingers like thin wind. You take a brush and write a single character: Zin. Quiet. It feels right. You'd expect trumpets, banners, maybe a commemorative poem. But instead, the paper's adoption is slow and practical. The imperial workshops begin producing it in small batches. Officials test it for durability. Scribes squint and adjust their technique. One even complains that it's too light and flies off the desk when I sneeze. Baby steps. Quirkily enough, you notice that early paper sheets are often reused. One side for notes, the other for wrapping tea bricks. Some even find their way into shoes, lining the soles of traveling officials. It's like the Empire can't quite decide if this invention is miraculous or mildly inconvenient. Still, there's no denying it. Something big has shifted. And as you walk through the quieter corridors of the palace, you hear it. Not the rustle of bamboo scrolls clacking together. Not the creak of silk rollers, but the soft flutter of paper being passed from hand to hand, like whispers made solid. It starts with a splash. Literally, you're standing in a courtyard beside a vat the size of a bathtub, peering into a thick, grayish slurry that looks like soup for someone who hates flavor. A young apprentice hands you a paddle, grinning. "Stir it," she says. You hesitate. It smells earthy, a little like boiled socks. But you've come this far, so you start stirring, slowly at first. This is where it begins, the actual making of paper. Not the idea, not the theory. The squishy, messy, glorious birth of every sheet. The pulp you're mixing is a combination of soaked mulberry bark, mashed hemp rags, and the occasional bonus fiber Maybe some discarded fishing net or rice straw. It's a humble soup. No alchemy, no secret herbs. Just time, elbow grease, and the kind of patience usually reserved for bonsai trees. Once the mix is smooth, think watery oatmeal. You help dip a framed screen into the vat. The apprentice shows you the technique. Straight down, no angle, let it settle. Then you lift, slowly. The water drains, and a delicate layer of fibers clings to the screen like a ghost of a page. She nods. That's a sheet. You carry it over to a drying board, where another apprentice gently presses it flat with a cloth. It's tender stuff, one bad breeze, and it's toast. You notice the courtyard is sheltered, the air still, the sun carefully angled. Papermaking, it turns out, is as much about controlling the weather as it is about fiber. Historians still argue whether this was the original formula or if we've romanticized it over time. Some early versions might have included bark from other trees or didn't filter the pulp so finely. Some say it was Kai Lun's workshops that perfected the ratios. Others think rural artisans quietly led the charge while he took credit in Chang'an. No matter what, the process you're watching now feels like alchemy, even if it smells like damp mulch. It takes hours for one batch to become usable sheets. You use the downtime to explore the workshop: wooden tubs for soaking bark, stone basins for pounding, long, handled ladles, reed mats, and racks for drying. Everything is handmade, and everything has a rhythm. Pound, stir, dip, lift, press, dry. You even try your hand at bark prep, peeling fresh strips, soaking them until they go slimy, then beating them with a mallet until your arms are jelly. It's strangely satisfying. The fibers break down into soft, snowy clumps, and when you press your hand into the mix, it clings like a sleepy cat. Quirky detail. Some early papermakers sang work chants while pulping bark, rhythms to keep time and distract from the sore shoulders. One tune you hear involves a mulberry tree falling in love with a hemp plant. It doesn't end well, but the melody's catchy. By midday, the workshop is drying dozens of fresh sheets in the open air. You can smell the change, the woody scent mellowing into something neutral and papery. The sun does its work. By late afternoon, you hold a finished sheet, thin, light, subtly textured. You almost don't want to write on it. Almost. But of course, you do. You dip a fine brush in ink and write a single phrase, 风过无痕. The wind passes, leaving no trace. The brush glides effortlessly. The ink blooms just a little, like it's breathing. Bamboo never felt like this. Silk never behaved so politely. As night falls, the workers begin cleaning the vats, stacking screens, and folding cloths. You sit on a wooden bench, paper still drying beside you, and realize you've just watched the beginning of a revolution take form, one soggy sheet at a time. It's not flashy. It's not loud. But in that quiet courtyard, with mulberry bark under your fingernails and ink on your sleeve, it feels like the world just got a little softer. A little lighter. You fall asleep to the smell of drying fibers and the sound of crickets, your dreams textured like pulp, floating on the surface of a peaceful, papery pond. You wake to the soft clatter of inkstones, and the murmur of scribes already hard at work. The sun has just crested over the tiled rooftops of the imperial compound, casting warm gold across the stone courtyards. You stretch, still sore from yesterday's pulp, stirring adventure, and shuffle into the palace scriptorium. This is where the transformation really hits you. The scrolls being handled here aren't bamboo. They're not silk either. They're smooth, lightweight, and suspiciously familiar. Mulberry, fiber paper, just like the sheets you helped make. You drift past rows of low desks, where junior clerks scribble with alarming speed. One looks up and grins, waving a sheet. Can you believe it? I copied an entire edict before breakfast. You glance at the scroll. It's crisp and clean, ink resting on the surface like a promise. No smudges. No splinters. You nod, pretending you're not just a little jealous of his handwriting. Before long, you're ushered into a quieter chamber, where an elder court historian is recording the emperor's thoughts on border disputes. He speaks. The scribe writes. Speaks again. Writes again. It's fluid, seamless, like calligraphy ballet. You try to imagine doing the same with bamboo slips, pausing every 10 seconds to grab the next plank and tie it on with string. The historian can review a full dispatch on a single sheet. It folds. It stacks. It files without clanking like a suit of armor. Historians still argue how quickly the transition happened. Some records suggest paper took decades to fully replace bamboo and silk, especially in the more conservative corners of court life. Others insist it spread like wildfire once scribes realized they could carry 10 sheets in their robe instead of dragging a scroll cart behind them. The truth, probably both. You still see a few holdouts gripping their bamboo like it's a childhood teddy bear. But paper is catching on. You wander through the palace archives, newly reorganized with labeled paper scrolls tucked into lacquered shelves. One official proudly shows you a ledger of grain taxes, 6 counties fully documented on just 3 scrolls. Used to be 15, he says smugly, and my back thanks me. Outside, paper is beginning to appear in the hands of guards, traders, and even a few monks. A traveling merchant tells you he received a bill of sale written on tree skin. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Folded nice. Didn't smudge. Good enough for me. In a side courtyard, a young calligrapher is teaching students how to adapt their brush technique. Paper is smoother. She explains, but it demands respect. You watch as her brush dances over the page. The ink flows cleanly, each stroke sharp and intentional. One student tries to rush. The result is a puddle. He looks up sheepishly. She nods. Told you. The palace itself begins adapting. Orders are dispatched on slim paper sheets sealed with wax instead of ribbon, tied bamboo bundles. Messages move faster, lighter. A courier laughs as he gallops off with 20 letters tucked under one arm. I'm running out of excuses to stop for wine, he calls back. Quirkily enough, you notice that paper is also sneaking into art. A palace painter unrolls a new piece of crane in flight, painted across 3 sheets, joined edge to edge. It's stunning, delicate, and entirely impossible on bamboo. You ask him why he switched mediums. He sniffs. Would you paint a dream on a fence? As twilight falls, you sit with a junior minister who shows you his daily schedule, painstakingly inked onto paper, folded into quarters, and tucked into his sleeve like a pocket notebook. Efficiency, he says, is elegance. And you believe him, because in these quiet halls and busy markets, in the rustling stacks and swift brushstrokes, you see it happening. Paper is no longer just a clever invention. It's becoming the empire's bloodstream. It carries orders, ideas, poems, taxes, complaints, dreams, all without the weight of wood or the cost of silk. You lean against a red pillar, watching a group of schoolchildren practice characters on scrap sheets. They giggle, smudge ink on their noses, and start over. One crumples a page and tosses it aside. Wasteful. Maybe. But it means paper is common enough now to mess up. That's a kind of progress, too. Above you, the mulberry trees sway gently in the evening breeze. You think of Kai Lun's experiments, of bark soaking in muddy tubs, and of the soft slap of paper against drying boards. And you smile. Because somehow, improbably, the stuff of silkworm scraps and tree bark has found its way into the center of an empire. And it's only just begun. Your ankle, deep in muddy creek water, sleeves rolled, eyes squinting against the midday sun as you help a local gather strips of mulberry bark. It's become part of your daily rhythm now. This ritual of stripping, soaking, pounding, and pulping. But today, you're asking a new question: why mulberry? The farmer beside you slaps a strip of bark onto a flat stone and begins scraping it smooth. Because it works? He mutters, like that's explanation enough. But you're curious. Why not elm? Or willow? Or those reeds everyone keeps tripping over near the marsh? Later that afternoon, you head to the paper-making shed and start comparing samples. A sheet made from straw tears too easily. Bamboo fibers are coarse and prone to clumping. One experiment with water lily roots produces a sheet that smells like sadness and collapses in your hands. But the mulberry paper, still strong, still smooth, it takes ink beautifully. It resists tearing even when damp. You press your palm against a stack of finished sheets and think this bark has something special. And you're right, mulberry trees, especially the paper mulberry variety, have long, flexible bast fibers in their inner bark. These fibers are soft but resilient, like the tree itself. Easy to strip, easy to soak, easy to mash into pulp. Even better, they regrow quickly after being cut, making them a sustainable source for continuous production. It's like nature left a recommended for papermaking tag on them. You try your hand at harvesting again. This time, you pull back the outer bark gently, revealing the pale, fibrous strands beneath. They peel away like ribbons, clean and ready. You give one a tug. It stretches slightly before snapping. Satisfying, like snapping a perfectly ripe bean pod. Historians still argue how early Chinese papermakers determined that mulberry was the best fit. Some believe it was trial and error over generations. Others think bark processing knowledge from cloth making played a role. Whatever the origin, by Kai Lun's time, the mulberry tree was king of the papermaking world, and not just for technical reasons. It was widely grown already thanks to its role in feeding silkworms. That meant the infrastructure was in place groves, harvesters, a steady supply of bark waste. You're starting to see it now. How a solution doesn't just need to be good. It needs to be available. Back in the shed, you join a group testing bark blends. One apprentice swears by mixing 70% mulberry with 30% hemp. Another prefers a splash of cloth rags for added softness. Like making noodle soup, one jokes. Everyone's got a recipe. You nod, but when you test a sheet made purely from mulberry, it holds up better than any mix. A quirky trick you learn from an older papermaker. Let the bark soak under running stream water for 3 days before pounding. Softens the memory. She says cryptically. You don't press her. Superstitions run deep in this craft, and honestly, her sheets look fantastic. At dusk, you sit beneath a mulberry tree, rubbing a strand of bark between your fingers. The wind moves softly through the branches above, and for a moment, you imagine all the things this tree might become. Edicts, poems, love letters, grocery lists. A whole empire's thoughts resting in its bark. And it's not lost on you that something so quiet, so ordinary, holds this much power. Not through fire or conquest, but by offering a better surface for ink. You chuckle softly. The tree doesn't even know it's important. It just grows. You're perched on a wooden stool in the back room of a small calligraphy studio, a brush in your hand, and a sheet of fresh mulberry paper spread before you like a blank promise. The room smells of ink, a deep, earthy scent with a hint of soot and pine. Sunlight filters through a paper window, casting soft shadows on the floor. You take a breath and dip the brush. It glides. No drag, no splatter, no awkward blotting like on bamboo. The ink lays down smooth and sharp, each character crisp as a black ribbon on snow. You pause, a little stunned. It's like the paper and ink are speaking the same language for the first time. The master calligrapher beside you chuckles. First time, you nod. Everyone always looks surprised. Paper's a generous host. He demonstrates a quick flourish. His wrist flicks, the brush dances, the ink sings. Before this, he says, writing was a fight. Now it's a conversation. You think back to earlier days, scripting on bamboo slats that soaked up ink like thirsty bricks, leaving every stroke dull and feathered. Or silk which blood ink like a gossip with no secrets. Mulberry paper. It listens. It holds the shape. It preserves the mood. You experiment with different brushes. Soft goat hair, stiff wolf bristle. Each one plays a little differently on the new paper, but they all behave better than before. Writing on mulberry paper feels like carving into water effort, sure but graceful, smooth, precise. Historians still debate whether the perfection of paper came before or after the refinement of brush and ink recipes. Did paper spark better ink? Or did better ink demand better paper? The chicken and egg argument of the Han literary world. Regardless, the trio, brush ink and mulberry paper, becomes the holy trinity of Chinese writing for centuries. You spend the afternoon practicing your favorite characters. Shan? For mountain, Yu for rain, Mun for dream. Each one feels different now, more alive. The paper gives them space to breathe, to stretch their limbs. In a side room, you meet a monk who's copying sutras. His hands are steady, his breath slow. Writing is prayer, he says, but only when the surface lets you forget your hand. He invites you to try. You kneel beside him, heart pounding, and copy a short passage. The paper makes it easy to be calm. Later, you help him roll the finished sheets into a scroll. The whole thing is light as a feather, no more than a child's toy bow. Compare that to the back, breaking weight of bamboo scrolls, and its clear information is now mobile. Knowledge can travel. Thoughts can ride in your sleeve instead of a cart. Work of the tradie, some artists begin adding powdered herbs to their ink to make the writing aromatic. One scroll smells faintly of cloves, another, oddly, like green tea. You're not sure this trend will last, but it's delightful while it does. By early evening, you find yourself watching a poetry contest in the central square. Contestants write verses on mulberry paper and post them on wooden boards. Crowds gather, some cheer, some laugh. One particularly daring student pens a cheeky haiku about the emperor's favorite horse. You wince. Brave soul. Afterward, you follow the winners to a tea house where their verses are passed around like currency. One scroll gets folded and tucked into a girl's sleeve. She blushes and hides it with a sip of tea. You grin. Even romance is lighter now. As the sky deepens into night, you sit outside with a brush and a sheet lit by a single lantern. You write slowly, not for speed or utility, but for the sheer pleasure of it. Every stroke feels like a whisper, every line a breeze. And you realize something quietly profound with this paper. Writing has become more than a task, it's become art. Communication, meditation, magic if you're feeling poetic. And tonight, beneath the rustle of mulberry leaves and the soft glow of oil lamps, it feels like you are. You're in the marketplace now, where gossip travels faster than the wind and secrets never stay secret for long. The stalls buzz with voices hawking spices, ink cakes, clay teapots, and something new. Tucked between piles of dried ginger and lacquer combs, you spot a small stall stacked with mulberry paper sheets. The seller leans in, whispering as if the paper might hear. Straight from the capital, imperial formula. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. Well, close enough. You chuckle, but your curiosity's piqued. Because this isn't just a market rumor anymore. The whisper of paper has traveled beyond the walls of Chang'an, beyond the scriptoriums and monk cloisters. Other kingdoms are starting to notice, and not all of them are happy. You move through the crowd and overhear a group of foreign traders, Khitan, Sogdian, maybe even Parthian, arguing in a tangled knot of languages. One holds up a sheet of Chinese paper like it's a magic charm. Another hisses, "How do they make it?" A third mutters, "Tree bark, they say." But it doesn't burn like bark. You pass by slowly, pretending not to listen. Too late, they've seen you. One says, stepping into your path, "Your hand, how's it made?" You shrug. "Bark and water." He scowls. "Liar." Then he softens. But a clever one. It's no surprise. The Chinese court is protective of its secrets, and papermaking is suddenly high on that list. You've heard stories of attempted bribes, of scribes vanishing after talking too freely, of accidental fires in workshops that had too many foreign visitors. Paper might be thin, but the politics around it, thick as dragon hide. Historians still argue how quickly the technique spread westward. Some say it took over a century before even a crude version appeared along the Silk Road. Others believe traveling artisans and captured papermakers seeded the secret far earlier. What's certain is that by the 8th century, Papermaking reaches Samarkand, possibly carried there by prisoners from a battle with the Tang Dynasty. But back here, in your time, it's still a guarded treasure. The Imperial Court issues new guidelines, workshops must report bark usage. Papermakers need licenses. Couriers carrying raw sheets receive escorts. You see one official patting his sleeves nervously as he rides. Rumor has it he's carrying samples for a border post library. The quirk. Black market paper is already a thing. You wander through the back alleys of a riverside town and see a man selling off cut scrolls and imperfect sheets. They're rougher, speckled, sometimes mismatched in size, but cheaper and good enough for everyday use. One buyer flips through a pile, nodding. Perfect for love notes. No one reads those twice anyway. Back on the main roads, you notice travelers wrapping goods in mulberry paper. One merchant packs porcelain in it. Another uses it to seal wine jugs. A guard uses it to roll tobacco. Paper is becoming ubiquitous, slipping into daily life so casually you almost forget how rare it once was. You join a caravan heading west for a few days. At night, by the campfire, the caravan leader shows you a tiny bound book. Nothing fancy, just scrap sheets stitched together with twine. Inside are maps, price tables, even a few doodles of horses. Better than memory, he says, flipping through it with pride. And lighter than a dozen scrolls. Still, not everyone's celebrating. In a border town tea house, you overhear a heated debate. It's an insult to tradition. One scholar fumes. Silk was sacred. This is bark. Another counters. It's what you write that matters, not what you write on. The table splits into factions. Tea is spilled, and someone storms out quoting Confucius. But you just sip your own tea, smile quietly, and pull a folded sheet from your robe. You've copied a poem on it. A silly one about a rooster who fell in love with a fish. You pass it to the tea girl, who reads it, laughs, and tucks it behind her ear like a flower. And somewhere out there, in dusty villages, merchant trains, border guard towers, other sheets are moving too. Carrying secrets, jokes, orders, prayers. The paper-making secret may be protected, but the paper itself. It's escaping. It's running wild, like wind carrying seeds. It's raining, not a storm, just that quiet, persistent drizzle that softens everything. Streets glisten, rooftops drip, and the scent of wet clay and steamed dumplings fills the air. You pull your cloak tighter and duck under an awning, only to bump into a soldier carefully unwrapping something under his armor. It's paper, not a letter or a scroll, but a tightly wrapped bundle of powder. For wounds, he mutters, seeing your curiosity. Keeps it dry. You nod, impressed. Mulberry paper, it turns out, has found its way beyond ink. Inside a nearby apothecary, the shelves are lined with tiny paper pouches, herbs folded into origami, like triangles, neat and labeled. The pharmacist moves with practiced ease, measuring doses and wrapping them in paper that crinkles like dry leaves. You try one. The texture's familiar. The scent of medicinal bark seeps through. It's functional, practical, oddly elegant. Mulberry paper's creeping utility doesn't stop at medicine. You wander into a general store where a merchant's wrapping porcelain bowls in thick paper sheets before tying them in hemp string. Better than cloth, he explains. Doesn't scratch, doesn't stain, and you can burn it when you're done. That's the thing about paper. It's becoming more than just a writing medium. It's wrapping. It's padding. It's weatherproofing. You walk into a shoemaker's hut and find him cutting thick paper for insoles. Warms better than straw, he says, and doesn't itch. In a palace side hall, you glimpse painted paper screens, cranes and plum blossoms dancing across panels so light they sway with every step. Once the domain of silk or carved wood, now replaced by bark sheets, stretched and lacquered. But the most unexpected use comes during a military inspection. You tag along with an army official to a supply depot. Among crates of grain and quivers of arrows are stacks of, yes, paper. Thick, treated sheets, waterproofed with oils. Armor liners, the officer explains. Light, flexible, surprisingly strong when layered. He hands you a piece. You tug. It resists, barely creases. Don't expect it to stop a sword, he adds, but it keeps the cold off your back and your gear dry. You even see paper lanterns used in signal towers. Their lightness means faster lift in the updraft. The garrison chief chuckles. Next will be flying the orders, not the messengers. Historians still argue how early these non-literary uses of paper emerged. Some suggest they were immediate, driven by the abundance of scrap from papermaking. Others believe it took a generation for people to realize that bark sheets could serve everywhere cloth or leaves once did. The consensus. As soon as people got their hands on it, they got creative. One day, you visit a wallpaper shop in the capital. Yes, wallpaper. The merchant unrolls patterned sheets. Clouds, dragons, flowers, all stenciled or painted by hand. Easier than painting the wall. He shrugs. You touch one? It's thin, but durable. Also keeps out drafts, he adds. And mice don't like the taste. In the evening, you attend a festival in a village square. Children toss firecrackers wrapped in waxed paper. A local priest burns folded paper offerings for the ancestors. You realize that the ephemeral has found a friend in paper. Rituals once too costly to replicate now flourish in this humble medium. Quirk of the day. A paper fan seller lets you try one made of 6 joined sheets with a bamboo handle. It's surprisingly sturdy. And if someone insults your poetry, she says with a wink, you can smack them and not damage the fan. You walk back through town under the dim glow of lanterns, many now sheathed in paper. The streets are quiet, the air damp and cool, and you feel it again, that strange softness the Empire has begun to wear. From the battlefield to the tea house, paper is slipping into every corner. It's not just for writing anymore. It's for wrapping, building, healing, decorating. It's everywhere, quietly indispensable. You pause under a mulberry tree, listening to the rain tapping its leaves. You pluck a wet, fallen bark strip from the ground and rub it between your fingers. And you think, who knew such delicate things could carry a civilization? The coins jingle in your pouch. Thick, heavy discs of bronze with square holes in the center. You've been carrying them all day, and frankly, your back is starting to protest. So when a merchant in the next town offers change in the form of paper, you freeze. Try it, he says, holding out a crisp, ink-stamped square. It's worth 5 bronze. You take it gingerly, half expecting it to dissolve in your fingers. It doesn't. The paper is thick, fibrous, dyed slightly yellow, and stamped with characters in red ink that declare it legal tender. Issued by the Salt Bureau, the merchant adds proudly. Saves your spine, doesn't it? Welcome to the awkward, early days of paper money. You wander through the market watching people react. Some accept the new currency with excitement, tucking notes into their sleeves or writing on them for good luck. Others scoff and insist on solid metal. You can't melt paper into a brooch. One old woman mutters, dropping 3 clanking coins into her rice sack. Back at a government office, you observe the printing process. Officials hand carve woodblocks to press the design onto each sheet. The ink smells sharp and metallic. The workers align each paper square carefully, pressing them into place, one by one. It's slow, but faster than minting coins. You hold a fresh note. The paper's rougher than the calligraphy scrolls you've handled. Clearly made for function, not beauty. You notice the official seals and watermarks, subtle designs pressed into the pulp before drying. Fraud is already a concern, and the Empire's trying to stay ahead. Historians still argue when and where true paper currency began. The earliest records of official notes appear in the Tang and Song dynasties centuries later, but here in hand times, you're witnessing a strange proto-version, exchange notes issued by specific merchants or government offices as a way to ease bulky transactions. It's not national currency yet, but it's getting there. A local brewer tells you he's begun paying his grain suppliers in paper. Easier to hide if bandits come, he says. You nod, imagining a coin purse versus a folded slip tucked into a boot. Still, not everything's smooth. You see a man nearly start a brawl after trying to buy a goose with a soggy, barely legible note. The vendor holds it up, frowns. This looks like it survived a flood and a noodle pot. Still worth 5 coins. The buyer insists. Maybe in a dream, she snaps, and the jokes begin to spread. What's the difference between paper money and a love letter? A tea vendor asks. At least the love letter makes you feel warm before it breaks your heart. You laugh, but deep down, you feel the tension. Paper money is convenient, yes, but it's also fragile, burnable, forgeable. And there's always someone asking, what if the paper stops being worth anything? The idea of value suddenly becomes slippery. In a dusty tavern, a traveling scholar gives you his opinion over rice wine. Value, he says, holding up a note between 2 fingers, is just trust written on paper. He pauses. But isn't that true of everything? You don't have an answer, but you pocket the note. Later, you watch a shopkeeper examine a stack of paper currency. She fans through them like playing cards, checking seals, creases, ink clarity. It's a new skill learned out of necessity. Already, the culture is adapting, and so are the notes themselves. You find some printed in colors, others with small red tassels tied to the corner. Part decoration, part deterrent against counterfeiting. One even has a poem written along the border, supposedly for luck, the quirk. A monk at a roadside shrine shows you how some villagers fold old notes into tiny boats and float them downriver to pray for prosperity. If it sinks fast, he says, good luck. If it floats too long, you might owe the ancestors change. As the sun sets, you return to your lodging, unroll your purchases, and count your change. A few coins, 2 creased notes, and something else, a quiet realization that money, like paper, is transforming. Lighter, faster, stranger. You tuck a note under your pillow, wondering how many hands it's passed through, wondering who it will belong to next. And somewhere in the dark, the mulberry trees continue growing, oblivious to their role in rewriting the rules of value. It's mid-morning in the upper quarters of the city, where the air smells faintly of sandalwood and status. You're invited to tea by a minor aristocrat. Polite, proud, and wearing robes so stiff they probably stand up on their own. His garden is meticulously pruned, and even his koi seem aware of their social class. You sit, legs folded, on embroidered cushions, while he pours tea with the elegance of a man who's never had to fetch his own water. The topic of conversation. Paper. I still use silk, of course, he says, waving a hand dismissively. Papers for shopkeepers and delivery boys. You sip and nod, because this isn't your first snob rodeo. The divide is real. As paper gains ground among scribes, merchants, and middle-class scholars, the elite, especially the older families, cling to silk scrolls like heirlooms. For them, writing on mulberry paper feels common, peasant-ish, like showing up to a banquet wearing hemp. You visit a nearby artist's studio and find 2 scrolls lying side by side. One is silk, glossy, cool. The ink slightly blurred like a memory just out of reach. The other is paper, textured firm, every brushstroke clean. The artist shrugs. Depends on the buyer. Nobles want silk. Scholars want paper. Guess who pays more? Later that day, you attend a calligraphy competition hosted by one of the city's guilds. The contestants choose their own medium. One uses silk, the other paper. The silk piece is elegant, floating like mist. The paper piece is bold, grounded. The crowd debates, whispers, and argues. The judge, an old general with half an eyebrow, declares the paperwork more honest. Still, paper's reputation climbs slowly. A younger generation of elites begins using it for practice scrolls, drafts, letters to lovers they're not supposed to have. One noblewoman even shows you a diary made of stitch paper sheets. Easier to hide, she says with a wink. You pass a bookstore. Newly opened, loud, and slightly chaotic. Rows of bound volumes line the shelves. For scholars, the owner says, and those who want to look like one. Most of the books are printed on paper. Silk is too expensive, too fragile, too rare. You flip through a poetry collection. 10 copper coins. You could have bought half a scroll in silk for the same price. Historians still debate whether this shift in materials created or followed the intellectual boom that would come later in China. Did cheaper paper democratize knowledge? Or did rising literacy create demand for cheaper paper? As always, it's probably both. But here in Han China, you see the beginnings of that cultural tug of war. Paper democratizes expression. It makes writing accessible, but that very accessibility threatens the prestige once reserved for silk and the scholarly elite. One afternoon, you stumble across a group of street performers. One is reciting poetry while his partner paints characters on paper sheets and hangs them from a bamboo pole. A crowd gathers, coins clink, and kids cheer when their favorite phrase is painted. It's raw. It's vibrant. It's culture with its sleeves rolled up. Later, you meet a poet who's just been snubbed by a high-ranking family for presenting his verses on paper instead of silk. They said it was village stuff, he mutters, tearing up the note. You ask if he regrets it. He shrugs. They read it, didn't they? You smile. Because in the end, that's the heart of it. Paper doesn't care about class. It listens to ink just as faithfully as silk. It folds and flies and carries messages to anyone who dares to write. Quirky moment of the day. You're handed a party invitation written on paper dyed pale blue, sprinkled with flower petals and perfumed with rose water. It's all the rage among the city's younger nobles. Your host explains. They call it petal scroll chick. You try not to laugh, but you also pocket it, because honestly, it smells fantastic. As the day winds down, you find yourself writing again. This time on a simple sheet of mulberry paper, your brush flowing faster than you expect. You write a memory, a thought, a tiny poem about koi and snobs, and how even the most delicate things can shake up the world. And you realize the paper may still be climbing the social ladder, but it's already slipping under doors silk could never reach. You're deep in the countryside now, far from the polished courtyards and perfumed salons of the capital. The land is greener, the air heavier with moisture, and the trees seem to lean in just a little closer. You're walking with a farmer along a narrow footpath, dodging low branches and muddy puddles as he gestures toward a hillside thick with mulberry trees. They weren't always here, he says. Swatting at a fly used to grow barley. Now, bark pays better. He's not exaggerating. Paper has taken root, literally. As demand rises across the empire, mulberry groves expand. Fields that once fed bellies now feed brushes. Hillsides are cleared for bark. Some villages that once specialized in rice or silkworms are now full time paper-making hubs. Their streams running gray with pulp wash. You step into one such village and smell it before you see it. The rich, soggy scent of soaked bark, mixed with the mineral tang of river water and the faint sweetness of steamed grain. The entire place hums with the rhythm of production. Bark strippers, pulp pounders, sheet dryers. It's all become an industry. A young boy shows you how to sort bark strips, thick ones for strong sheets, thin ones for wrappers and padding. His hands move fast, automatic. He's been doing this since he could walk. Historians still argue whether this boom saved or stressed China's forests. Some believe paper production actually helped preserve trees by replacing bamboo and wood tablets, which required constant cutting. Others suggest the shift merely relocated the pressure, creating monoculture groves that stressed soil and disrupted traditional crop patterns. The truth probably lies somewhere in the mulch. You meet a village elder who remembers when the hills were wild, full of cedar and wild ginger. Now it's just mulberry, he sighs. Beautiful trees but thirsty and boring. He chuckles, then coughs. Progress always has a price. You help a group of villagers carry bundles of stripped bark down to the river. One man tells you how the paper trade lets him buy better tools, afford medicine for his daughter, even build a new roof. But I miss the rice, he adds, almost to himself. Even animals are affected. Goats no longer roam freely. They nibble at the bark, which ruins harvests. Now they're tied up or moved elsewhere. You see one chewing at its rope, probably plotting something. The quirk. One village builds a shrine to the paper goddess, an improvised altar made from dried pulp, decorated with red ink and feathered fans. They burn scraps each new moon, praying for clean sheets and steady orders. Further upriver, you meet a crew experimenting with other plants again. Rami nettle, even pine bark. Just in case, they say. Can't rely on one tree forever. Their results are mixed. One sheet crumbles. Another turns green in the sun. A third smells aggressively like wet socks. Still, the experimentation is a sign they know resources aren't infinite. Back in town, a landowner brags about converting 3 rice paddies into bark plots. He's planning to expand. Mulberry's the future, he says, raising his teacup. Rice doesn't carry poems. You sip your own tea, then walk past his paddies. Rows and rows of identical trees, their leaves rustling softly in the wind. Uniform, controlled, profitable, and a little eerie. That evening, you sit with a tired papermaker by the riverside. His fingers are stained gray, his face lined with sun and steam. It's good work, he says, better than hauling bricks. But sometimes I wonder, are we planting paper or planting ghosts? You don't answer. The trees rustle, a crane calls from the far bank, and you realize a paper may be soft, but its roots run deep, deep enough to reshape landscapes, rewrite economies, and replant the rhythm of life in the soil itself. You're back in the capital now, seated cross, legged on the polished wood floor of a scholar's tea house. It's one of those places where the air always smells of pine smoke and ancient ink, and where heated debates are served as frequently as tea. Around you, a half-dozen scholars argue over an unlikely topic, Kai Lun. He didn't invent anything. One says, slapping the table for emphasis. I formalized what peasants already did in the countryside. Another snorts. And that's why he deserves credit. Organization is everything. A third sips his tea in exaggerated silence, clearly waiting to drop some devastating counterpoint. Welcome to the Historical Debate Club, Han Dynasty edition. You've heard this one before. As paper becomes more essential, the question of its origin becomes political. Was Kylun a genius innovator, or a clever administrator who polished a pre-existing village craft? The records are murky, vague at best, and the man himself left behind no self-glorifying memoir, just sheets and process notes. You wander to the back room, where a scroll is displayed under glass, a royal edict acknowledging Kai Lun's contribution. It praises his method, his presentation to the emperor, and the resulting material for recording the deeds of the empire. But there's no mention of whether he invented or merely improved. Historians still argue over these distinctions. Some claim bark paper sheets existed long before Kai Lun's 105 AD showcase, used quietly in rural workshops or temples. Others believe he synthesized scattered ideas into something durable and reproducible. Paper is a standardized product, not just a craft. You head to a temple where monks have gathered centuries of scrolls, some rumored to predate Kai Lun. One, brittle and moth-bitten, seems to contain characters on bark paper, though it's hard to tell. The ink is faded, the texture coarse. Was it a prototype? A fluke? A misdated relic? An old monk shrugs. Truth is like rice wine. It changes flavor every time someone tells it. Back in town, you meet a young inventor proudly demonstrating his new pulp filtering screen. Finer mesh, tighter weave, smoother output. Improving the method! He grins. You ask him if he invented paper. He laughs. Of course not. But I made it better. There's a glint in his eye. He's not trying to steal credit, just to take part. It makes you think, maybe invention is never a single lightning bolt. Maybe it's a series of candles, each one lit by the last, Quirky detail. There's a traveling opera troupe performing a comedic play called The Barky Genius. It stars a bumbling Kai Lun who accidentally invents paper while trying to fix his laundry. It's ridiculous. The audience loves it. The jokes are awful. But at intermission, everyone's buying souvenir scrolls. On paper, of course. You stop by a public notice board, freshly wallpapered with announcements, poems, even political satire. A caricature of a certain tax minister draws a chuckle. Someone's drawn a pig nose on him. The material? Mulberry paper, inked, tacked up, and read by dozens before sundown. Whoever made that sheet never imagined it would become a punchline in a city square. As twilight sets in, you climb the city wall, paper lantern in hand, and look out across the rooftops. Somewhere in those streets, thousands of hands are folding, wrapping, sketching, scribbling. Paper is everywhere now, essential, invisible, quietly revolutionary. You pull out your own notebook, stitched from bark, dyed with tea, your brush snug in a hollow reed. You flip to the first page where you once wrote your name. The ink is faded, but legible. The fibers still hold. You smile. Was Kai Lun the real inventor? Maybe, maybe not. But that doesn't change what you're holding. Because someone, somewhere, took bark, water, and an idea, and gave the world a surface to think on. The wind rustles the branches above you, stirring the pointed leaves of a mulberry tree. You lie beneath it, back against the cool earth, and let your fingers trace the texture of the bark. It's rough in places, smooth in others, like it remembers every hand that's touched it, every fiber pulled from its skin. This is where it all started. Not in a palace, not in a lab, not with some flash of divine insight, but here with a tree. Silent, unassuming, generous. You sit up slowly, brushing off dust, and reach into your robe. Folded neatly in a pocket is a sheet of paper. Mulberry fiber, handmade, still holding the faint scent of the workshop where you dried it. You unfold it gently. It creases like a whisper. On it, your own handwriting, a journal entry, a poem, a question. You can't even remember which anymore, but it feels weightless in your hands, like a thought with a spine. You wander down the hillside toward the edge of a quiet village. Children run past you flying paper kites, triangles of thin bark, skin on bamboo frames, swooping through the air like messages for the wind. A woman wraps dried plums in printed wrappers, humming as she folds them with precision. A scribe sits cross, legged under a tree, transcribing folk tales onto stitched leaflets. Paper is everywhere, but nobody's really talking about it anymore. That's how you know it's won. It's not flashy. It doesn't need monuments or parades. But every message carried, every poem saved, every letter sent across distance. This quiet legacy is in all of it. And when something becomes that woven into life, it doesn't need to be seen to be believed. You spend the afternoon tracing paper's journey backward in your mind. From kites and wrappers to scrolls and sutras, from court orders to secret love notes, from awkward merchant ledgers to rebellious student poems. All of it from a tree most people never gave a second glance. You chuckle. Somewhere out there, someone's still arguing whether Kai Lun deserves credit. Someone else is trying to fold a better fan. Another is pounding bark in a bucket, grumbling about aching shoulders. The revolution continues, silently. The quirky bit: one monk claims that writing on mulberry paper improves memory because the fibers whisper the words back to you. He's definitely just trying to sell more scrolls, but you appreciate the poetry. And so, with one last breath of the paper, scented breeze, you lie back down, arms crossed behind your head, watching the branches dance above you. One falls. A single leaf, curling gently as it drops. You catch it. You think, this could be paper too. Because now, you see it everywhere. Not just the material, but what it represents. Communication, creativity, connection, a space to think, a soft place to land, and in that softness, that simplicity, lies a legacy more enduring than steel or stone. The wind is gentle now, brushing across your skin like the stroke of a brush against paper. The light fades softly, and the world quiets around you. You feel your breath slow, your body grow heavier, with the comfort of stillness. It's been a long walk, from the earliest awkward bamboo scrolls to the moment mulberry bark met water, ink, and intention. From Kailun's curious experiments to the Empire's fluttering letters and fragrant wrappers. And all of it wrapped in the soft, fibrous gift of a tree that never asked for credit. You let your thoughts drift now, carried on the breeze like one of those kites. You don't need to remember every fact, every date, every dusty debate. What lingers is the feeling, that strange, quiet thrill of a small invention making the world more human. Your eyes flutter closed. The rustle of leaves above sounds like a lullaby. Somewhere, a brush dips into ink. A paper window creaks gently. A poem, half remembered, floats at the edge of your thoughts. Nothing to hold on to. Everything to rest in. Let it all fade now. Let the mulberry trees keep their secrets. You've walked the long path of paper, and it's time to let it cradle you too. Sleep easy. You're made of thoughts, and thoughts, now, have the softest place to land.